crucial for all of us as business leaders, policymakers, and advocates to really understand what this means for the future. And today is just the start of that conversation as things will be evolving rapidly over the next 3 months. What we're trying to do right now is provide some clarity and actionable insights to help you navigate this evolving landscape. We have an amazing panel for you today. I'm going to let them introduce themselves when they do their presentations. But what we are going to be covering is how federal and state climate actions may change in the new context, the outlook for the IRA and its funding, the changing investment and venture capital landscape for climate tech and renewable energy. As you can see, our panelists here bring amazing expertise across the climate sector, each offering unique perspectives of state level leadership, business strategy, and investment opportunities. Today, we're going to explore what will be happening in this rapidly changing environment. A few quick housekeeping. One, you should see at the bottom of your screen a Q&A. And at the end of the panel, each panelist will be talking for 8 minutes. At the end of the 3 panels, I will take the audience questions and start to ask them. I recommend that you ask questions as the panel discussion continues, and I'll just grab them right off the top, and we'll try to, with the idea that we try to get to as many panelists, as many audience questions as we have. Remember to hit send once you submit your question so that we receive it. If your question is for a specific panelist, please include their name in your submission so that I can direct that to the panelists. Couple of other points, we plan to send out a full copy of the video at the end, as well as a survey, because again, we know this is just the start. A lot is going to change over the next 3 months. We want to know from you, besides how the webinar went and the glitch in getting in, we want to know from you, what else do we need to cover? What other panelists we should bring up here so you have all the information in hand as we move forward. Lastly, we are recording this webinar. So again, thank you so much for joining us here. I am now going to pass this off to Rebecca Chilton from Foley Hoag.
Thank you so much, Natasha. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining an important and, as Natasha said, just commencing conversation that I think will be very active for the next 4 years and beyond. I'm Rebecca Chilton. I'm a partner with Foley Hoag, a law firm based in Boston with offices along the East Coast in Denver and overseas. We are a small-ish firm with one of the oldest renewable energy practices in the country. And from that base, we also have developed a leading edge climate tech investment practice, as well as standard renewable energy transactional practice. I work on the transactional side, doing sort of full suite M&A, financing, and development legal services. But what I love about our team is that we're deeply integrated in the regulatory side as well at the federal, state, and local levels. So from that base, you can imagine we are keenly interested in what is happening on the federal level and how it's going to move down through the state and local levels as well. So my role today is to kind of speak to the federal side. Not to bury the lead, because I know everyone wants to be thinking about the Inflation Reduction Act, but I do think it's worthwhile to satisfy my regulatory colleagues and speak a little bit to some things to be tracking on the federal regulatory side. it is, but the IRA is the big splashy, it's where the money is. But I think some of the slowdown or braking on the momentum of renewable energy may actually come from the regulatory side. So we are going to be tracking as a firm any of the changes in FERC, any new appointments to the board, how that shows up in a favoring of incumbent utilities versus new generation, and how the board looks at interconnection and solving transmission, which, for many battery developers, particularly starting to have a presence on the transmission side, I think is a really important thing to be tracking. We may see a slowdown in approvals of funding, of permits at the federal level, everything including the environmental NEPA process to approval of USDA applications or Department of Energy loan program office applications. We may see, very likely we'll see an increase in incentives for fossil fuels and a decrease in regulation so that they become, again, more competitive in the market to renewable energy generation. So it's not just what can be done to slow renewable energy generation, but what can be done to accelerate fossil fuel consumption. And lastly, we will be tracking very closely tariffs as they influence the cost of renewable energy development. Tariffs have a kind of a double-edged sword, interestingly, so we'll talk about that a little bit later. So again, really encouraging you to be tracking some of the major issues at the federal regulatory level, but turning now attention to the Inflation Reduction Act, which is this watershed legislation out of the Biden administration in August of 2022 that funneled trillions of dollars into the clean energy economy and clean tech economy across the country and across all federal agencies, with a particular requirement that 40% of those funds be used for in the sort of EJ40 aspect, which is environmental justice, that 40% be used to lift up renewable energy and the clean economy in low-income and disadvantaged communities. I want to touch on three major components of the IRA. There are dozens of funding streams that flowed out of the legislation, but I think most of us who are active in renewable energy feel the presence of the IRA in sort of three places. Number one is the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which is a $27 billion funding stream that is administered by the EPA. Second, I'll talk about the Department of Energy Loan Program Office, which had enhanced lending and guarantee authority under the Inflation Reduction Act. And lastly, again, not to bury the lead, but talking about the federal investment tax credit and production tax credit and what we're seeing there. On the GGRF side, so the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, again, $27 billion flowing through three primary channels. One directed specifically at solar development in low-income communities. Another one sort of stepping up or standing up a green bank system across the country. And the third being really focused on technical assistance and capacity building, especially in low-income communities. So the EPA maybe presciently awarded all of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund awards in the spring and summer. That is a positive thing and a sort of marker in the sand from which I think the EPA and its grantees have been moving. I think we are going to be challenged potentially by any hostile administration or agency leadership in the actual execution on those awards. So to the extent that the grant agreement, for instance, is not signed with the agency, or if funds have been granted and have not yet been dispersed out to qualifying projects, there is a important, but I would not say significant risk that the agency may decide to claw some of those funds back or to reverse some of those grants. That implicates a number of different legal challenges potentially, and sort of the slowdown of the implementation of the GGRF as a whole. I do think of the three programs, it's probably the most notably renewable energy for low-income communities focused, and to the extent that there may be hostility in the administration towards that kind of a program, I think it would sort of be the poster child. However, 27 billion in the grand scheme of things is not that much, and there may be higher priorities at the agency, certainly will be higher priorities for agency head Lee Zeldin if he's approved. So wanting to particularly raise a red flag for anyone who is a GGRF grantee or anticipates benefiting from GGRF funding, that this may be more vulnerable than the other programs under the IRA. The Department of Energy Loan Program Office is kind of a little bit of a dark horse. Wasn't the most, I guess, newsworthy funding stream in the Inflation Reduction Act, but it has been used pretty significantly to fund both innovative, so clean tech, clean energy, nexus, innovative projects, and also under the IRA, renewable energy that was replacing fossil fuel energy infrastructure. Under proposed Secretary Chris Wright, we anticipate especially that fossil fuel energy infrastructure replacement function of the Loan Program Office potentially to be rolled back. Although the Loan Program Office, because it has a mandate to support innovation in clean energy, generally may not be that much at risk. They certainly have made a good start, but are not as far along as I maybe would like them to be on deployment of their new IRA appropriation. But I do think its core function probably will continue on some level, but I do expect this fossil fuel energy infrastructure replacement function of the LPO to be rolled back potentially. And lastly, I think sort of the marquee project under the Inflation Reduction Act is the sweeping changes that were made to the investment tax credit. There is a companion tax credit, the production tax credit, that is funded over a period of 10 years. It's less used in most of the renewable energy sectors that we work in, so I'll focus today mostly on the investment tax credit. We have seen the investment tax credit be extended and renewed 5 times in its history, 2 of which were under the former Trump administration. We expect that to continue. I would say my strongest bet on the IRA surviving would be in the tax credit surviving. Because it implicates so many different kinds of investors and companies. It implicates jobs, job creation, manufacturing. There are, under the new IRA form of the investment tax credit, adders, which incentivize the use of domestic content, so materials manufactured in the United States, that support projects in communities that were once or continue to be fossil fuel dependent or are brownfields. And third, that are placed in low income or serving low income communities. Like with potentially parts of the LPO and the GGRF, the tax credit adder that's focused primarily on low-income communities may not survive in this administration. I do think there is a strong case to be made for both domestic manufacturing and energy community. Domestic manufacturing, quite simply because it creates jobs. And many of the domestic manufacturing that has been started under the IRA are in Republican districts, particularly in the South. And so I think there is I think stronger than average likelihood that that adder may survive. The the energy community is not exclusive of fossil fuel in those communities. And so to the extent that there's an attempt to revive fossil fuel industry in a particular community does not mean that there cannot be an adder for a renewable energy facility. I think that's a little bit weaker an argument. So I think the energy community adder is probably a little bit more vulnerable. And then again, the low income adder. The other types of credits, not just solar, wind, your normal, battery storage, geothermal. I think there are uh, sort of other arms of the investment tax credit or similar tax credits that support everything from EV and EV charging stations to clean hydrogen, geothermal, as I mentioned, carbon capture. Each of those has particular strengths and weaknesses and arguments for keeping them, especially in a Republican administration, one of which is the creation of hydrogen using renewable energy resources, because if you're using dirty energy, what we would consider to be non-renewable energy, electricity, to continue to make hydrogen, you are part of the increasing and accelerating demand for energy. So where you can solve for that with a renewable energy project, providing the power needed to create hydrogen, you may be stronger. So I think there's, on any one of those tax credits, there are arguments to be made on both sides. I think the core investment tax credit will remain, probably also the domestic content, and then varying levels of certainty around the other types of technologies and the other adders that came in under the investment tax credit. So that's my sort of quick overview of where we are on the federal side. I'll turn it back over to you, Natasha, to introduce our other panelists.
Thank you, Rebecca. Joe Curtatone will now discuss state and local action.
Thanks, Natasha, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us live and those who might see this later on. Pleasure to follow Rebecca's discussion. I'm going to bring you a perspective as the president of the Alliance of Climate Transition, but also my former role at the municipal level as a mayor of Somerville for 18 years, being a local municipal leader when Donald Trump was last president. So with the, Donald Trump's election victory, our country really faces, as to be seen, a shifting policy landscape, which on the climate policy side poses daunting challenges and opportunities, I'd submit, for advancing our climate goals. And I'm going to talk about the perspective from subnational, state, and local and regional collaboration, what that means. But let me start off by saying, I wonder if people noticed that the climate transition was not a big topic in this election, which was very frustrating. Yet the exit polls showed that Americans' top concern is the economy. So what I would say here is this underscores our collective need and responsibility as climate advocates to do a better job of connecting our work to economic opportunity, stability, and job creation. I mean, to achieve a resilient climate positive future, we have to emphasize both the environmental imperatives as well as the economic opportunities of the energy transition. And there are real success stories, but they weren't even brought up or emphasized there. The push for climate solutions needs to reflect a dual purpose. Taking climate action seriously and safeguarding our planet and rebuilding the economy, building a new industrial revolution to provide resilience and financial security for millions of Americans. The election's results also clearly tell us that we will be operating, as we've said here already more than once, in a less supportive federal environment for renewable energy and climate action. Let me, before I go further, say, and the many colleagues I used to work with on a local level, and they still work in the different agencies, state, local, federal, and those at the advocacy level, I think there is a strong consensus that directionally our path will not change, although there may be a slowing down as a result of new policies being implemented in an attempt to undo the success over the last several years. But the undercurrent of momentum is a force that we need to leverage. This political climate really places a greater responsibility at the subnational level on states, on local governments, the private sector, indigenous communities, foundations, nonprofits to really drive that progress forward. And I'd submit, we're ready for that challenge. The global movement on climate action started at the local, municipal, regional level. That set the pace and standard on a worldwide stage, and then buttressed by state level action. And we've seen what the previous Trump administration was like before. We have a good idea going forward, and we'll continue to sift and absorb the many ebbs and flows and valleys and peaks, we hope, in the upcoming 4 years. But we have to continue to fight to maintain the progress we will secured over the past 4 years. Get projects cited and permitted to show the real benefits of clean energy in the economy. Really continue to lead the charge on policy and innovation at the state, local, and regional level. Leading at the state level allows us to maintain momentum even in the face of shifting federal policies. So what can be done in states? I'd submit to you a ton. State legislatures and executive offices have an enormous role and have played an enormous role in setting policies to modernize how we plan and build and pay for the electric grid, address the large and growing backlog of renewable energy and battery storage projects stuck in the interconnection queues. They played a big role in implementing meaningful state incentives to drive development and meet state climate clean energy goals, and create clear and predictable rules of how projects are cited and permitted in ways that meaningfully incorporate community feedback. I mean, just last week, it's a few days ago here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the legislature passed 2 tremendous pieces, significant pieces of legislation. First, they passed an economic development bill authorizing hundreds of millions of dollars for the state's burgeoning climate tech sector over the next decade. Second, they passed an ominous energy bill to improve siting and permitting, procuring energy storage, build out a statewide network of electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and accelerate the state's shift away from fossil fuels. The bill also included a large number of provisions that did not get as much attention in the press, but will be certainly instrumental in helping us to achieve our goals. And they include expanding the use of grid enhancing technologies, allowing meter socket adapters, which will reduce the cost for many homeowners to install solar panels, and several other technical changes that will make it easy to build renewable energy and make clean electrification more accessible to families and individuals. Now, each one of these provisions requires extensive work, expertise, and compromise among stakeholders. While the state certainly makes the final decisions about what makes it into a final bill, none of it, not one part of it, would be possible without deep work from dedicated advocates and coalitions who research policy and analyze different approaches, develop proposals, build consensus, and really keep that momentum going. And we are at a point at the energy transition where policy needs to be updated rapidly to respond to the evolving ecosystem. And this means we need to pass a climate bill in every state, every session. And at the municipal level, we need to leverage all that leadership that has been happening over the last decade in communities, large and small, urban, suburban, rural, to educate and engage the public, launch public awareness campaigns about the economic and job creation benefits of renewable energy projects, counter misinformation. And I invite you to go to our website, www.joinact.org, and check out and sign up at our misinformation chapter. We need to counter that misinformation with clear fact-based communication on how climate initiatives improve local economies and actually create opportunities. We need to continue our work on zoning and local permitting. So to develop a streamlined and community-focused permitting frameworks for clean energy projects, collaborate with utilities and developers to align local goals with regional and state priorities. And we need to advance community-led energy projects, support localized renewable energy projects like community solar and microgrids and energy efficiency retrofits that demonstrate real visible and direct benefits to the end users, to residents, and also work with public utility commissions. We need to do deep work to participate in meaningful influence and have meaningful influence on regulatory processes at the public utility commission level. I mean, utility rate cases and long-term system planning, incentive-based rate making, These are just a real few examples of the critical work done by PUCs to set the regulatory framework in which utilities operate. So meaningfully participating in these dockets takes a lot of time. You all know this, resources and a lot of expertise. And it really often requires expert consultants and experienced attorneys to achieve success. And doing that requires resources, people, time, and money. So we have a real opportunity to focus on the enormous set of energy transition priorities that states control. And we are most effective when we can pull together broad coalitions to advocate forcefully to solutions that will help everyone. We have to also focus on messaging, connecting climate solutions to economic benefits. There are coalitions of nefarious forces that are countering us, that are attacking the efficacy of climate technology. We've seen this. That's why we launched our misinformation and state tracker. Climate initiatives must clearly link environmental imperatives to economic opportunities like job creation and manufacturing and construction and high-tech sectors. Have to link them to cost savings for families through energy efficiency and electrification, to community revitalization through clean energy investment and infrastructure improvements. We need to be able to demonstrate success stories like battery storage facilities or renewable energy installations that boost local economies while reducing emissions. And the case is easy to make, but we got to make it. Again, what was frustrating, we didn't make it in this election. So now's the time to roll up our sleeves, get further involved outside of our normal work of investing in technology companies or just advocacy, but even just in your own community. We really have to double down, build those broad coalitions that bring together those diverse stakeholders and partners, advocate forcefully for community solutions that benefit everyone, and pass comprehensive climate bills at the state level in every session. And we need to advance that impactful work at the municipal level to educate and engage and demonstrate the benefits of clean energy, and continue to advocate deeply in regulatory processes to create a robust framework for utilities and developers. Subnational organizations, cities and towns, regional coalitions, and state level organizations and governments have been doing this. We need to accelerate that work. We've done it before. We need to continue again. Natasha, I'm going to pass it back to you. I look forward to the further comments in the Q&A.
Thank you, Joe. I want to remind everyone, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A, and we'll actually go a couple minutes later if people can stay on because of our computer, our technology issues. I want to now pass it to Dan Goldman.
Thanks, Natasha. It's great to be here. So I'm Dan Goldman. I'm one of the managing partners at Clean Energy Ventures. We're an early stage venture capital fund with about $415 million of assets under management. We have 30 portfolio companies that are all companies in the climate tech space, and they're mostly domestic. We have a few in Canada and a couple in Europe as well, but 36 out of 40 companies are in the United States. So we're deeply aware and follow the implications of this election, congressional and executive. And I would say I'm also chair of the board of the Northeast Clean Energy Council ACT, and it's super wonderful to work with Natasha and Joe. And so happy that they bring these events to this audience. So what I would say, and we had our LP annual meeting last week, and I'll just repeat some of what I said there, is that we know very little about what's going to happen now. I would say the overall indications, there are a lot of conflicts in the administration as to what might get unraveled and what might not get unraveled. But I would say right now we're taking a pretty cautious approach about sort of like projecting what our company should do or what we should do as an investment firm in terms of federal policy. The one thing I would say is, I think there's some areas that you could say are more likely to be winners and other areas that are more likely to be losers. We tend to think that things around the electricity grid, electrification, which we consider to be a mega trend, is something that will be really hard to stop by changing regulation. We think that could be really good for continued deployment of renewables, but it's definitely something that we need, especially with electricity demand growing so rapidly, largely underwritten by AI, but also electrification in a lot of other areas. And we really don't see that easily slowed down. I think areas that we would define as possible areas at risk are things related to carbon capture, carbon utilization, carbon accounting, where there might not be the same level of support from the Department of Energy around specifically those areas. And I think that's pretty monumental and critical, because a lot of technologies in the carbon capture area need incentives, need government support for them to get to a scale where they're commercially viable. So that could really set back, I think, our ability to look at carbon capture type technologies over the next 4+ years. And those are technologies that we really need in order to address climate change. The other thing I think we tend to think about is, how does the US compare to other regions, particularly Europe? We've always taken much more of a carrots approach to commercialization of climate technologies, whereas I think Europe is much more of a sticks approach, regulating industries, regulating cement, steel, other industrial enterprises, and making sure they reduce their carbon intensity, carbon emissions as a result. The US has been, and I think the Inflation Reduction Act is a good example of this, much more of a carrots, where they're incenting new technologies, incenting industries to develop domestically. And I would say, we have companies in our portfolio that have radically benefited from that. I'll point out, a company like Nthcycle, which is a Massachusetts company that has developed a critical minerals recovery technology in Ohio. So very red state. And a technology that fits really well with that area. And I think, to the point Rebecca made, and Joe also, we see a lot of technological innovation flowing into manufacturing that is in red states. And that provides, we believe, some resiliency to at least parts of the Inflation Reduction Act and also the infrastructure bill. So we don't think overall that this legislation can just be rescinded across the board. We do obviously think there are certain areas that might be more at risk than others. And so things like domestic manufacturing, particularly in supply chains that are highly dependent on China, and that could include solar as well, but certainly battery supply chain, critical minerals recovery, those are things where we're really dependent on China. And I think it's an imperative of this administration to try to reduce our dependence on China and build domestic manufacturing. So we could see a continuation of industrial policy domestically. And I think when we think about how our portfolio companies need to reshape their narrative, and I won't say this is anything new, because they've been, I would say, promoting this narrative for the last many years. The narrative can be more about domestic manufacturing, can be more about onshoring of supply chains, national security, and creating that resiliency around our supply chains. So I think that's going to continue. And that might be a little bit of a more prominent message than just saying, hey, we're about reducing carbon emissions, which I think also is important, of course. But I think getting the attention of federal regulators, of the Department of Energy for grants, I think it will be a much more important narrative to show how we're building a domestic industry. And let's not forget that the clean energy industry has added 142,000 jobs in 2023. So this is growing twice as fast as the US economy job creation overall. That cannot be ignored even by a Republican administration. We should also note that there are 18 House Republicans who have asked to protect the Inflation Reduction Act tax credits that they say would have spurred incredible innovation and incentivized investment and created good jobs in red states. And so we see this primarily in southern states, where you have a lot of manufacturing, you have a lot of wind, solar, battery storage development, and that infrastructure is creating jobs. And I don't think it's going to go away so easily simply by the whims of one man. So I think that's maybe I'll stop there, and because I think we only have about 10 or 15 minutes for questions, and leave time for questions.
This question, so I'll start doing the questions. This question is for Rebecca. You talked a little bit about the potential of clawback. Can you specifically talk about why you think there's a big a likelihood of the adders to EJ communities getting cut?
Right, so I see two kind of related questions. The first is about, can money that has been granted or awarded be clawed back? And as I was alluding to earlier, the further down the line towards getting dollars into end users' hands you are, every step makes it more challenging for an agency to claw that money back. You also have to have the will to do so in the agency, and you have to have the time to do so, and you have to prioritize that over other activities that you might want to focus on that are more headline type activities for your agency. So where, to the extent that GDRF has been awarded, it would be challenging already to claw it back. The more that they are making investments in communities, that's even more so. So I feel like the GDRF as a whole will be sort of under scrutiny, but then there will be the questions of, is it worthwhile for the EPA administrator to prioritize that versus, fighting clawbacks or versus other priorities that he might have. With the low-income adders, the reason why I feel like it might be vulnerable is that it is a competitive process that begins with the U.S. Treasury interfacing, the IRS interfacing with the Department of Energy. There is a review process, there are portals to manage, and I think it would feel inconsequential, and I think it would be an easy thing to kind of look like you're slicing at the Inflation Reduction Act, and it's a pretty easy thing to eliminate. I think we also understand that low-income communities have less advocacy than rich investors or manufacturing companies, and so I think it would be harder to protect that adder, especially if they were planning to keep something like the domestic content adder, to preserve sort of the momentum towards manufacturing that we're seeing with the IRA. They may need to kind of give and take there, and I think that the low-income adder is an easy one to get rid of, unfortunately.
Sorry. The next question is, and it's for Joe or anyone, but is there anything we can learn from the return to the states on sort of Dodd abortion rights, anything that we can put in place at the states to ensure that we're protecting IRA, CHIPS? We also had a question about making sure we protect the infrastructure bill. So it's not just the IRA, it's the whole package. Is there anything we can learn from that? And what about those bills as well?
I'll take a crack, because that was an interesting comment, and I just reflected back recently that the Dodds case was again, I didn't agree with the Supreme Court's decision. A whole people on this call don't, basically said there was nothing in the Constitution and the Due Process Clause, so I have found is that protected, that allowed for that provision. I'm going to say that very narrowly, and there are a collection of climate suits we've seen over the last almost 10 years by youth organizations, group residents against states or the federal government, that some have been dismissed. There was a settlement on one case in Hawaii, I believe, to decarbonize the transportation system by, I believe, 2045. So I think the bottom line is you always look at precedent-setting cases, what that means. I think the more legislation, I'd submit, would to hear Rebecca's opinion. I don't practice law anymore, but I still understand how to read a case, that are codified and engrossed in municipalities, at the regional governments, at the state levels, that advance climate action goals, and obviously federal legislation even more powerful. I think legislation itself could be challenged, or the application of any executive action could be challenged, just like we'll be poised to challenge anything as we did under the last Trump administration and some of his actions then. But I think that I guess you can look at the application of what part of the Constitution cases can be brought. That's the one thing to pay attention. But I think the more, again, building that momentum with the drafting, adoption of legislation and policy at each level of government, I think it just strengthens that position. But that's my quick thought on it.
Anyone else want to follow up on that? Any thought, then I'll circle back to any thoughts on one question we have about we talk a lot about IRA, but what about the infrastructure bill? Are we likely to see anything roll back on that piece?
Well, I would maybe just jump in. I mean, I think we are a little worried about, things like grid enhancing technologies and GRIP funding, which largely result from from the infrastructure bill. And of course, that whole infrastructure is focused on trying to make our transmission system more resilient, but also we need to expand it pretty dramatically. So, there's been a lot of support for basically using technology, whether it's like grid enhancing technologies or modeling of the grid to relieve constraints, before we start building tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars of new transmission lines. We try to implement some of these technologies that can better utilize our existing lines. And so, I think there's kind of bipartisan support for that, but there is a pretty significant change at FERC, and it's unclear whether FERC will allow some of the orders that were previously passed to continue, or they will reverse some of those orders. I think there's going to be a very new modus operandi at FERC going forward.
Thank you, Dan. Another question you have, maybe this is for Rebecca, or actually it was suggested the whole panel, is what do we need to, so we've talked about sort of what might happen, what do we need to do to sort of stop what's happening at the federal level? So we proceed at the state and local level. How do we is there anything we can do, or what should we do to stop the tide at the federal level?
Just for my part, I'll start. To me, because the House is so narrowly Republican, advocating with House reps, not just in blue states, but any of our listeners who are, in red districts or red states, with the exact kind of data that Joe was mentioning, jobs, investment. I'm from North Carolina. North Carolina is, perennially a red state. There are some very conservative eastern counties in North Carolina that have benefited enormously from property tax revenue from renewable energy investment there. And so advocating with your House rep and with their colleagues in the House with data about sort of comprehensively, as much data as we can feed into the system about how antithetical to job creation, to a stable economy and a growing economy, repealing major pieces of the IRA or the infrastructure bill would be, is to me a first priority in terms of action on the federal level.
Yeah, if I could add, and my work as mayor, I mean, I served on the board of directors of the National League of Cities and the U.S. Conference of Mayors. I work with mayors around the country. It's interesting, no matter what party we identified ourselves with, we were lockstep in here on the things we loved. Things at the local level impact, as we saw the world from up close at that street level. Infrastructure projects, these investments that have local positive impact, there is strong bipartisan support. So that advocacy, as much as I talked about that subnational level, whether you're a red state, blue state, whatever they identify as a purple state, that those letters, those emails, those phone calls are effective. I mean, the IRA, as I read someplace, and I agree with this, creates an economic revolution. And if you look at where as an impact of leveraging the IRA with the CHIPS Act and the infrastructure and manufacturing investments and bills, it's those conservative states that have benefited the most from those investments. And there's going to be, just put your our sort of electoral hats on, a major advocacy and electoral work on the midterm elections, and there are many legislators in the Senate and the House who are up for re-election, and the House is very tight. It's actually tight all around. So I submit a lot of that was effective even the last time around, and it'll be effective now. And as I think it was mentioned earlier, you saw, even Speaker Johnson referencing he won't take a hammer to the IRA, but more of a scalpel at the request of almost 24 Republican House members whose districts are benefiting from that. But it goes back to that narrative. This legislation, this work has resulted in this impact on people's pocketbooks, jobs in their communities, local tax revenues, and unlocking economic opportunity.
The one thing I would also add is, and we have a lot of corporates in this country who are not supportive of dismantling what has been done over the last 4 years. The auto industry has spent tens of billions of dollars to build a supply chain and retool their factories to make EVs. Are they going to be asked to spend another $100 million to go back to ICEs? They are not going to do it, and the financial markets are going to penalize them in a major way. So, that's very, very difficult thing to completely unwind. Likewise, we have, tens of billions of dollars being invested in battery supply chain in the US. Again, a very difficult thing to just like turn off overnight. The other thing is we have oil companies, cement companies, steel companies who have made, very strong commitments to decarbonize, and many of them have said, we don't want you to pull out of COP, of the conference, and we want to continue with the path we're on. Now, I don't think they're going to turn down the right to drill in public lands and other things. Don't get me wrong, and that's terrible. But I don't think they want to see reversal of legislation. Oxy spent $1.2 billion buying Carbon Engineering, a carbon capture and utilization company. How are they going to justify that investment if all of that gets unwound? So I think there's a lot of pressure to keep going with some of the things that have been initiated over the last 4 years, but there is likely to be added things on the fossil side as well.
So I'm going to kind of frame the sort of 3 questions in one. And that will be sort of the last question. And if you could all tackle that. One was, what can we do in the next 2 months? How do we make sure we get those, that messaging to Republicans? And this one was sort of directed at Dan, but I think everyone can answer it, understanding that we have a message and dissemination issue. Will companies be investing? Will people be investing in that more? Or who is going to invest in that message and message dissemination to make sure we are clearly getting this piece across? So next 2 months, and then the second piece was sort of messaging for the future. Who pays for it? Who does it? How do we make sure our message is consistent? And how do we get that out there?
Go ahead, Dan, go ahead.
Okay, I'll be quick because I know we're short on time. I mean, I think the next 2 months we have a lot to learn. It's pretty tough to create a strategy right now, but I think the message is to try to promote the amount of economic development, like I said, onshoring of manufacturing, that are critical messages that I think are very bipartisan in nature. And so I think we have to present the climate technology, climate industry, as it were, as one that does just that, creates economic development, and importantly, gets us away from dependence on China. And that's obviously another geopolitical message that I think resonates quite well on both sides. So that's our primary focus over the next 2 months. I think to the point of what should we be investing in and how should we think about that? I mean, during down times, whether it's financial crisis, we see huge leaning in by the private sector. And over the past, 10 years, we've seen huge leaning in by the private sector. We expect that to continue. We expect investment banking to continue to support companies. We expect private equity and venture capital to grow. It's grown substantially over the last 8 years. And we think that can really fill a huge amount of the gap. Can't fill all of the gap because it's very, very hard to get new technologies into the market without public money. But we do think it can fill some of the gap. And there's a particular effort around first-of-a-kind financing of new technologies. And that's an area that's grown pretty substantially in the private sector. So I'm optimistic about private sector leaning in and filling some of that gap. And then obviously at the state level, we have a lot of progressive states, and I think they will fill that gap as well.
Rebecca?
Go ahead, Rebecca.
I would just add that, I operate a lot on the project level, just moving positively and being very focused on execution, seeing opportunities and putting your capital stack together, being creative and resourceful around talking with private sources of capital that maybe hadn't quite gotten in, creating opportunities for new partnerships with financial institutions and investors, and local and state governments, really being sort of forward thinking and proactive about what does your particular project need, because as much as you can do a meta of conversation and data information and messaging about sort of large data sets, I think the stories that hit and the stories that compel local representatives and elected representatives are ones with real names and real faces at real addresses. And so executing on your projects and not taking this as an opportunity to curl up in a corner or slow roll your projects. It's instead an opportunity to move forward assertively, to complete projects. And then every time you make an advancement, complete a project, or have a new investment, send an email. You don't need a PR firm or a lot of fancy integrated messaging. I think volume here is as important as a perfectly refined message.
I'm going to be brief to build upon those two. Yes to what both Dan and Rebecca said. Also continue to humanize the message and what it means individually to every person of regular walk of life. In industry, I think, as Dan has mentioned, opportunity, and a really need for them to step up to invest in that message. And governments don't typically do a real good job at messaging, unfortunately. So, and that's why it's up. We also want to, as we're doing the misinformation tracker, is to put that information and democratize that information to everyone's hands so we can tell stories. And as Rebecca said, success stories. And that starts now. And, at the government level, bureaucratic level, we tend to do messaging and reaction after we've done something and so forth. So in addition to celebrating those projects, the benefits of the climate transition with the economic benefits and other social impacts we talked about, that information's out right now, and we need to use that to take on the misinformation that's proliferating all the messaging conduits.
So a couple of notes. I want to respect people's time. We are over time. There are a couple of questions that haven't answered, but I would like to suggest we are going to copy the questions, send them to the panelists who they're directed to, and get those answers. And when we send out the video, we'll answer those final questions for participants. We want to make sure everyone gets their time. And then I just want to thank the moderator, thank the panelists, not the moderator. I can't thank myself.
Thank you,
Thank
Natasha.
the panelists and say, is there promise that this is just the start. And do you have any parting words for our audience today?
I'll start. I would say, so one of our clients has a tagline that renewable energy is intelligent and inevitable. And I think I kind of look to that as a daily reminder that, as both Joe and Dan were mentioning, there's a momentum here that an historical trend that cannot be turned back. I think to continue to move that forward is our best strategy in a difficult and challenging time. I also think there is a market move to increased electrification and a skyrocketing demand of electricity that's also in our favor. And so aligning ourselves with momentum and continuing to be part of the solution, we will, we will continue to have a robust clean energy economy.
Very quickly, I mean, I always say that we are currently spending about $1.2 to $1.5 trillion on climate-related technologies and infrastructure around the world globally. That's what we've spent every year for about the last 3 years. What we need to be spending to decarbonize, to get to net zero by 2050 globally is $6 to $9 trillion. So we're radically underspending what is needed to reduce carbon emissions. There is no hope that we are ever going to spend 6 to 9 trillion. But even if we just double to 3 or 4 trillion, we would have a much better chance of achieving those goals. And at some point, I think we as a country need to wake up to where a lot of other parts of the world are in terms of their views around climate, and spend more on this. And I think the financial markets, the capital markets are starting to realize this, but I think the government is lagging behind, as it often does. And so the trick is like, how do we bring the government into the same realm of where the capital markets are starting to see the opportunity? And it's not just about incentives. It's about a massive global opportunity to create completely new industries. That's very hard for government to get its arms around, but it's absolutely essential if we're going to do this.
I'll just add, thanks everyone for joining us. And again, apologies for the little glitches we had at the beginning, but I found it to be a great conversation. We're going to have many, many more. We're going to be engaged. We need everyone to be engaged moving forward. Step back, take a deep breath. Remember, look at all the success we've had collective as part of our collective achievement, and we got a lot more to do. There are going to be some challenges. I'm going to take them straight on. We have the best story to tell. Let's build upon that. Let's do the work wherever we're at, nationally, state, local, regionally. We need to work, not just stakeholders, we need to bring in partners. It's a powerful message and the impact is real. I look forward to working with all of you to tell that and many more successes to come. They will come.
Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our audience. We really appreciate you being here. And once again, when we send out the thank you, we will send you a video if you want to send it along. We will also send out a survey to sort of figure out what topics we should cover next to make sure we're answering all your questions and helping you prepare in real time for what's ahead. So thank you and have a wonderful rest of the day.